Welcome to Off Color, right out of my basement again, just recording in the house. So if you're noticing some discrepancies in the sound, you should join our Patreon. Okay. You're listening to Off Color Podcast, a podcast where we keep it real about race and identity and other uncomfortable topics. I'm your host, Rebecca Henderson, aka the Tan Tigress, and I've got my intrepid producer here, Janice Mako.
Hey, everybody.
This episode is part 2 of a discussion about America's favorite pastime, guns. If you missed the first part, go back and check it out because it was wild, okay? Today's conversation is a little bit more on the serious side, but you do not want to miss this incredible discussion. All right, let's get started. It's been wild, right? So we have with us today, we have the great, the beautiful, the powerful Charlie Watkins. Hey, Charlie, glad to have you here. Charlie, tell us what you do and why you're popping on today, real quick.
So as of right now, I'm an NRA certified pistol instructor, Army combat veteran, deployed to Iraq 2004 to 2005. Heavily involved in what's going on in the community and the nation right now as far as Black Lives Matter and pushing forward for our actual civil rights and our rights to be able to defend ourselves.
Fantastic.
It got real serious for me right then. I was like, oh my God. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to present the last minute pinch hitter. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a woman you may know from all over the internet talking her smack. She is wild. She's powerful. She's an advocate for all kinds of stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, I present Nami Thompson. Nami?
Hi. I'm Nami Thompson. I am a gun owner. I like shooting stuff. I also work in public health as a public health planner, and I'm a mama of a 5-year-old. She lives in Boulder with her dad.
Okay. I think this is like an uncomfortable thing to say right now, but I'm going to go ahead and say it. Sometimes I'm like, should I have divorced my husband so I could get a break from my kid? Is that like a terrible...
No. I actually live in Denver on weekdays and Boulder on weekends so that I don't have to deal with all that, because that's a conversation we have to normalize. Yeah. Kids are horrible.
I mean, and it's just intense because I feel like the pandemic, everything is like going up and up and up, right? Like our level of what we can sort of tolerate or things that we were coping with before the pandemic. Now we don't have those options. Including like a babysitter. So, and my husband is listening to this because he listens to all my podcasts, and I do not want to divorce you, honey. I just need a break. Okay, that was like a coded message to my husband on my podcast. Now, let's talk about the topic at hand, which is pow pow surprise. So I want to start with the lawsuit in New York, right? It's in New York. The NRA. Somebody sum it up for me because you know what? I got to take a drink. Janice, take it away.
All right. So this was recorded on the 7th. And as of yesterday, which was August 6th, the New York Attorney General announced that they were bringing a civil lawsuit against the NRA and the top leaders in the NRA for finance fraud and basically tax evasion, but tax evasion would be a criminal case brought by the IRS, so that hasn't been processed yet, but they have submitted their evidence to the IRS as well. So this is just the civil suit, but one of the punishments, I guess, that the AG is asking for is that they completely dissolve the NRA and start again from scratch because the fraud was so far-reaching and had been going on for so long.
Don't you wish that logic applied to like the cops? Like the fraud is so bad, we should just dismantle it and start over. Or like banks,
student loans,
right?
Yes. start over.
Right.
No, I think that there is something to that, because that was actually the same thought I had. Was I was thinking, damn, if we're going to get rid of the whole thing, like, are we allowed to get rid of whole things now and start over? Because man, I think that could be a real change for America, and it could be the country that people believe it to be, that we know it's not, right? So I want to know, well, before I just quick caveat, I'm like a hippie and shit, and I never would fire a gun and blah, 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 right? Now it's the pandemic, and I'm kind of like, ooh, do we need guns or what are we doing, And so that is something that has been on my mind, and I've been curious to talk to people, especially knowing that I think for Black gun owners, it can be quite different than being a white gun owner. So, Charlie, are you a card-carrying member of the NRA?
I am not a member of the NRA. I'm just got my certification to be able to instruct through the NRA. Yeah, I had to go through them for the credentials. I could have either went through them or the United States Concealed Carry Association. I chose the NRA because of name, brand, and backing, because it's a lot easier to get recognition as an instructor. But I don't have a personal membership with them because I haven't messed with them since I messed with Orlando Castillo. Okay. I only use them for the accreditation.
I thought maybe erroneously, because I feel like one time I was like, oh, maybe I'm confusing this story. Oh my God. Do you know Sawatu in Detroit, the Free Sawatu movement? Do you remember her? So she was a mom. She was like, she was pregnant, and somebody like hit her car, and she brandished her firearm, or, she was a legal gun owner, and then she ended up going to jail, and she was in there forever, and she had to have her baby in shackles, and it was like this terrible story, And so like, I feel like that was the thing I think I'm thinking about, was that the NRA did make a statement like on her behalf. And I feel like they were like, well, she's a registered, gun owner, blah, blah, blah. But I think like maybe I don't remember now, like what happened with the NRA and Philando Castile.
So Philando Castile was being pulled over. He was an NRA member. He was concealed carry. He did what Minneapolis said by law you have to do. You have to alert the police officer if you are concealed carrying, and if you have your firearm on you. He did everything according to state laws as the NRA instructed him to do. And they did give him a chance to be able to brandish that card as he was reaching for it, because they were fearful. They were fearful, I'm doing a quotation marks for my hand for those can't see this, that he would pull out a gun and decide to fire up on him first. He was a card-carrying NRA member, an upstanding citizen of his community, very active in his community. He had nothing wrong, blemishes as far as his record. It was a perfect opportunity for the NRA to say, okay, this is how you don't involve yourself as police in Black life. And they said nothing, absolutely nothing to defend his life.
And so I now I'm realizing, oh yeah, because I couldn't remember. So
many, right?
That's what I was going to say.
I mean, it's too many. It's too many, and
one is too many, but
Nami, are you in the NRA?
No, I kind of just didn't see the point. It wasn't. I learned how to shoot a long time ago from fellow Asians, Filipino folks especially, who they're my people. They like guns, and so I had a lot of support there. And then I also worked with a group called Redneck Revolt. And I really appreciated the support that they offered me as far as when it came time to purchase and carry. And so I just didn't really have any space or need for the NRA.
So that's interesting to me, because I have not heard of like an Asian gun club before. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't know that was like a thing.
I don't know that it's like a gun club, but when you go to the shooting range, like the uncles there are all Filipino. And, like, it is just a popular thing. And actually, I think it was probably popularized by US American movies in the Philippines. I think also recognizing that many people who come from various Asian countries were not able to keep their guns. They were confiscated by their governments. So coming to the US meant that there was freedom to own a gun, and that the nature of self-defense went something very different to somebody who's Asian than it does to somebody who was born and raised in this country. The self-defense was legit, like someone knocking on your door, taking away your family, telling you you're communist now, or whatever it might be, and just giving you an ideology. So it was very important for Asian people to have that right and take advantage of it.
Wow, like I'm looking at Charlie. Charlie, I see your face across the Zoom, baby, and I see how you're like, yeah. Are you familiar with this?
I am actually. I had some Filipino friends in the military that gave me a good um, in-depth analysis of what their experience was coming to this country and being able to receive freedom as far as firearms. And they did say that it's big practice, and most of their families will be able to learn how to shoot at a very young age. As soon as they learned that they had those freedoms, they exercised them a lot. I've heard that from a lot of my Filipino friends, and yeah, it's true from what I know, from my experience.
In my case, I was raised Sikh in the Sikh religion. One of the tenets of Sikhism is that you carry a weapon. Historically, it's been a sword, and so I was taught very young to to fight with swords, and to shoot rifles. And the idea is that you don't use it unless you really have to, mostly in defense of others. But you're going to fight if you have to, and you're going to do it well. And so at some point, I guess like a giant sword became outdated, and so we started learning how to use guns instead.
This is deep. I'm like, whoa, I'm learning new things every day because I'll be ignorant in front of the world. It's fine. I did not realize that about Sikhs because I think in my mind I always thought they're kind of like more peaceful or something, or I don't know anything about the religion, not really.
Yeah. I mean, a peace is the ideal, right? And also, when it comes to people like in Canada, and there's Jagmeet Singh, right? And if someone's talking hate speech, he's not going to just like pull out his sword and be like stab someone, right? Like that's really not worth it. But if it's legit, like we're in a place where combat of some kind is occurring, if somebody has attacked you or somebody near you, then yeah, you're gonna fight. And also the preparedness for any kind of war has been historically critical for Sikhs. Sikhs come from Punjab, and Punjab was the very last state in India to fall to British colonialism, and that was in the 1900s. So, I mean, it was quite late, and so that sense of warfare um, was critical. And at the same time, people on either end of whatever side they're fighting on, Sikhs would also stop and feed them and give them water and give them medical care. So that peace element is really important. It's also really critical that we just don't lay down and take anybody's bullshit.
You emphasized that it was more for the defense of others. That's interesting to me because I feel like a lot of people in the United States that carry weapons like to believe that they carry weapons for the defense of others, whether it's like for their family, or if they were out in public and there was like a mass shooting event, that people who carry weapons in public kind of believe that they would be that hero that would step up. And there's this idea of the bad guy with the gun versus the good guy with the gun, and the good guy with the gun would protect other people. And I feel like that isn't quite the way that it actually plays out when those situations arise.
That's a good point. It's not really about I'm in that Walmart and I'm going to pull out that gun and deal with that shooter. It's very much more along the ideological lines. So, for example, as a person of South Asian descent who is a settler in this country, it is very important for me to be centering Black Lives Matter. And in that way, being available and ready to participate in movements in any way possible. And so that might mean being ready to fight. Similarly, it might mean being ready to fight for other Sikhs. When 9/11 occurred, Sikhs were often mistaken for Muslims. Instead of saying we're not Muslim, go kill the right people, we stood in solidarity with Muslims. And what's wrong with being Muslim? And so it's very much that type of ideology.
And from another standpoint of that, you don't see it as the ideal Wild Wild West where the good guy with the gun steps in, because there truly is a buildup of a nation of cowards around here. You see a lot of these days, a lot of the gun owners don't really have that sense of duty. They just see a sense of pride and vanity because they have a gun. They want to inflict their will upon others the true American way, as opposed to those who have the skill and the will to actually use it in the right scenario. You'll see a lot of people in scenarios where there may be mass shooters and there may be somebody there with a gun that doesn't have the will to be able to do so because they don't have the conviction. As she was saying, that conviction to be able to involve yourself in someone else's life to the point of being able to give up your own life or fight for them. That's not as rampant in the country as you think it would. It's more so vanity with a lot of these new gun owners that want to be able to say, I have a gun and I'm willing to be able to do this and inflict my will. And if you mess with me, I'm going to be the wrong one to mess with. A lot of the things that you hear in rap videos or a lot of the movies is what these kids are trying to emulate rather than a real proper defense of using a firearm safely.
Yeah, I kind of equate it back to like the whole mask thing, you know, like if you really believe you're carrying a gun to protect other people, then why won't you wear a mask for the same reason? It's because there's not the sexiness factor to it, right?
Right.
A couple of things that came to mind. The main one for me was safety, right? So I was always taught, guns not good. A lot of things happen. I also have had family members die by gun violence. As a kid, I remember a friend's child committed suicide with a gun. So I always had a lot of, I don't feel positive about that. I feel really surprised by how many progressive type people that I know here that I'm thinking that, and I'm surprised they're so pro gun. That is interesting to me coming from New York and living in Colorado, because I also feel like the culture around guns here is a little bit more, or I don't know if I'm making that up or what.
It's more Wild West out here because we are liberal in the state as far as gun rights. Colorado's an open carry state, so they're pretty lenient as far as gun laws. You just can't open carry in the city of Denver. So the main white audience in Colorado are very pro rights with as far as guns. As long as you don't try to take it from them, they're going to be able to use that right as much as they want. In New York, where it's much more restricted, there's not much people can do. They can't really fight for rights that they don't have. But here, while they have them, they're going to fight for them very much so.
So, Charlie, how did you start? Why did you become an instructor?
So the reason why I became an instructor is for the past couple of years, I've been assisting and guiding people to a friend of mine, Edgar, for Guns for Everyone. And he was getting a lot of business dealing with the concealed carry permit. But one thing that I saw with him that I wasn't a big fan of, sorry, Edgar, if you see this, is that you didn't do a lot of hands-on training. And there were a lot of new gun owners that didn't know how to be able to use their guns properly. It's one thing to be able to know the law, but if you're knowing the law and still use it, you need to know how to properly use it to keep yourself and others around you safe. So once I took the course myself and saw how much it takes to be able to inform someone, and especially a new shooter, on how to be able to use it properly, I just got involved and did it myself. I wanted to make sure people were out here with guns, not only having guns legally, but using them safely.
Yeah, my dad was a firearms instructor at the local community college. He was a police officer as well. And he would tell stories all the time about getting the young students who were taking criminal justice, and he would get some of the young females in his class and that kind of thing, kind of doing the hold it out and turn the head and pull the trigger really fast and just they were just terrified of it. And he was always so proud to talk about how he could take somebody that was so scared in that situation and make them confident and safe at the same time.
Yeah, that is one of my biggest goals or my biggest achievements that I get from the class, especially from women shooters, because you guys are so inquisitive and you want to know everything in and out before you even fire it. To see you guys firing so well and gain that confidence by the time you come out the range for the first time. Most of my students are new shooters, so to see that confidence leaving there leaves me feeling elated every time. It makes me really love what I do. To see someone shed their fear of that firearm once they learn how to properly use it.
One of the things I think is often missing is training around not getting your gun grabbed from you when it's being held out. And that is something that I learned from colleagues is go get that training, please, because when you hold your gun this particular way, someone will try and grab it from you. Or when it's just being carried in your side like that, that is something that happens is someone will try and grab it. And so this was a critical piece for me as well, was learning some of those smaller granular details about what it means to be safe, because often safety is thought about as lock up the gun or trigger safety, right? But not necessarily thinking about the other elements that come with carrying and with ownership and storage as well.
Guys, I'm still scared of guns. What can I tell you? So even as you're talking, because right now you can't see what's going on in my mind, but I'm over here thinking, I'm should I try to shoot a gun? Should I see? Should I go out? Should I put on a mask? And is it outside? Could I do it? I don't know. I also am do we like need guns? Like, are we trying to take over? You know what I'm saying? Because I've read that Constitution, that white supremacist document that I'm not a fan of. However, I am aware that our Second Amendment rights, my understanding of it is that it's in case your government, it turns tyrannical like the King of England, then you should be able to organize your militia and pow surprise, right? That's how I always sort of thought of it. That's why I believe it was in there. I also believe this idea of the right to bear arms is because their gun was like a musket. It was like, you know what I mean? Like you're like, whoop, like one, like, you know, like it wasn't what we're dealing with now, as far as like our firearms. So I'm really kind of curious, I guess, because as someone who does, I like legit, I'm like, yeah, the Constitution's a white supremacist document written by white supremacists, made for white supremacists, and that's the ideology that our country's based on, right? So I think for me, looking at you, my brother Charles, okay, you know what I mean? Like, what's happening there? You were in the military, all that. Now, also noted, my father's military family, right? But I am always curious about why Black and brown people join the military.
To be basically honest with me, it was a lack of options. I was working dead end jobs. I came back from a school that I was supposed to play football for because I was playing football and they had some Samoan guys in the crew that was bigger than me. So I came back home feeling defeated, started working odd end jobs that I had no room for advancement for. And by happenstance, I saw a commercial for the Army and I called for some information. Coincidentally, the next morning, a recruiter called me and asked if I was ready to go. At that point, I lived in my mom's basement and not feeling like I was going anywhere. I said, sure, why not? It's a step in the right direction to get me out of the house, get me out of state, and get my own experience. For me, it was just a way out to be able to find who I was in that moment.
So, and that is, yeah. So to me, that kind of like makes my heart hurt because I feel like that's what happens to so many Black men in the country where they feel like that's the only way is I have to, you know, I can do this. This is a way to go to school, including my own father, right? Like, this is what we have to do to like make it in this country. So I hadn't intended on asking you this at all, but now I'm like, tell me about your military experience. like
All
what
right.
like do you mind speaking on that a little bit?
Not at all. So I signed up right before 9/11. I went to the Army of August 2001. Signed up as a truck driver. I was stationed in Fort Hood, Texas, in the 1st Cavalry Division. Deployed to Iraq March 2003 to 2004, March 2004 to March 2005. Participated in the battles of Najaf and Fallujah with the Second Battalion of the 7th Cavalry Regiment. Was involved in some active warfare. It was not what I anticipated it to be. There's a lot of downtime where you're trying to really figure out who you are, and in the midst of that downtime, there's chaos that happens, and you typically respond to it. I learned a lot as far as the most I learned from the military was the regiment of what they instilled in you while you're there, the things to be able to put use for back in the community. But as far as warfare, it was a crapshoot dealing with the Iraqis. It was hell, and that was why I got out. We did some horrible things to some very innocent people. But the military itself, I see the sense of hierarchy when it comes to the sense of domination and control. When I came back home from the military, I saw the same sense of domination from the police force and the government imposed on the U.S. public. That's when I decided to start becoming more involved because I've seen the same pain and affliction that we were putting on other people was done to our people. We didn't even see it because we had that mask of the iron fist and the silk glove with everything they put on TV. I was showing you what you're doing is for freedom when we've never really had freedom in this country. They're saying that we're doing it for our rights as people when we don't have right to even speak our minds as we're seeing in 2020. So once I saw the hierarchy difference with the military and the government, I said that's going to be enough is enough. They made an enemy out of me. I'm going to take everything I can that they taught me and teach people to use it against the government that's imposing their will upon them.
Shit. Wow. I think we're all going to jail from this podcast, but
oh, my bad.
Yeah, they might just pick you up and send you somewhere.
Well, right. Listen, things are like, all jest aside, I'm just trying to live. We're all trying to make it through this and do what we can do. Sure. But like, the truth is like, I am scared of that. I am scared. Like, we've seen it already. Like, I feel nervous that like, oh, there's going to be a knock on my door and they're just going to, because they can.
I was 16 or 17 at the time of 9/11. And, you know, I grew up in New York. And, as a person who's brown, immediately this was the thing, right? And all of our communities are saying we're being wiretapped, we're being spied on. There are people who are disappearing from our communities, people being taken from their tables at dinner right in front of their families. And so many folks were just like, that sounds ludicrous. Like, we don't do that in this country. And I was like, "You read the Patriot Act? Like, do you know what this shit is?" And so as a community, like, that fear was so real that, like, it was just this year that I felt like I could talk about it. And interpretation as a profession was not really a profession. So I was going in with cousins who were human rights lawyers into Cranston, Rhode Island government owned detention centers and meeting people who, like, had been pulled off the side of the street legit, and, like, you know trying to find out. Like, I was just taking notes, like, what happened. And then I learned that so many of their families didn't know where they were. So I made it my job to be like, all right, I'm going to write to your family or call them and at least let them know where you are. Totally indefinite detention, illegal, no sense of when they're going to get out, no charges. Half the time they were in there because their name that was the same as somebody else on some terror list. And it's like, well, I guess Mohammed bin whatever is a common name. That fear is real, and that is one of the things that makes me want to pursue. I mean, when we talk about a tyrannical government and the constitution, I don't care about the state's definition of what freedom is and the constitution, but as far as tyranny and the government takeover, that happened to me when I was a kid. Like, I understood that when I was just a little kid, and I knew, like, that whatever the state decides is freedom is not what I decide is freedom.
Nami, that was beautiful, girl. I'm like, whoa. This came up also on our other gun conversation, but it was 9/11, right? And I feel like that was that the start. Do you guys think, like, is that the start of, like, the sort of the, like, serious militarization of our police force? And, like,
It was definitely the Patriot Act that mobilized the militarization of our police force. No doubt about it. That gave them free reign to be able to rule against the public how the government saw fit, and unlimited funding towards resources, whatever they called upon. If they need military tanks in a town of population of 500, they're going to grant it at that time. The Patriot Act indefinitely enabled that.
The sale of surplus as well, like that military surplus,
Yes.
and also the nature of individuals coming back from abroad and becoming police officers after such violent conditions that they're exposed to.
Oh, yeah, they recruit heavily. When I came home, they were trying to recruit me for the police force, sheriff's office, jail security, any kind of security, you name it. They were trying to recruit me. They wanted someone fresh back from that military mindset to keep that mindset and don't have to worry about really brainwashing someone else to be able to come like that.
wow. I don't like seeing how the sausages are made in general, but but now I'm like, yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. Oh, Lordy Lou. Okay. One other thing though, I will say, do you think that having guns, like, really makes you safer in America?
I sent you an article about writing about this, and the truth was that I don't know that it makes me safer per se. I think where the safety came from was this psychological empowerment, because I'd been so, I think, so deeply impacted by so many of these behaviors and so much fear and so much hurt that at some point I had to do something. And it was a way of reminding myself of what I'm capable of. And I felt better after giving myself that empowerment and that reminder. I think also, in as much as it is a part of the spiritual practice for me, there is safety in that. It's meditative. And so that kind of centering, right, of saying, I have to be thoughtful about how I use my power. And growing up and learning how to use swords, I was 4 when I was first handed a sword, and they give you the real thing. There's no, like, rubber stick nonsense that they give you. And the reason they do that is not because they want, cut and struck and then, like, you learned your lesson. It's because if you turn around with a sword in your hand that's super sharp and you hurt somebody, then you hurt somebody. And that's the lesson. And so that sense of, like, you have a lot of power, kiddo, and you have to be really smart and strategic about how you use it, because I was starting to fly and spin out. by the time that the Trump election happened. I think that that is where the safety came from, was that meditative quality and the ability to use my power well.
Wow. First of all, great answer. That was a in-depth analysis to your life, and I appreciate that. As far as my aspect, does it provide security? Does it make me feel safe? No, because we're dealing with a government that has tanks and drones and everything else you can name up intelligence-wise, and probably somebody listening into this conversation that knows all my moves. But it does give me a chance to fight back. And as long as I have a chance to fight back, I'm going to be able to use it. Juris Sergeant used to tell us all the time, if you want peace, prepare for war. So everything I can do on my end, I will make sure I do so. I'll train hand-to-hand combat with my martial arts. I'll train with firearms if somebody has firearms against me. I'm able to get my hands on something bigger to be able to deal with bigger threats, I'll do so. But I don't feel safe, but I feel like as if I have a fighting chance and I have weapons to be able to use to fire back.
My dad was a prepper. He had a significant collection of weapons and other things like solar powered batteries and backups of this and backups of that. He was prepared if there was no more access to clean water, he had backups for that. If there was no access to food, he had backups for that. If the government was trying to harm its own people, he had a plan for that. The one thing that he did not have a plan for was his own health. And he died of a heart attack at 66. And I guess my point in all of that is that in our conversation with Benzie in our second episode of this season, he brought up that a lot of his patients and a lot of the American people act as if death is not inevitable in some way, right? So it just is so interesting to me to see people say like, oh, I'm going to be prepared to fight in this way. I'm going to be prepared to protect my own life. And it's like, death is still inevitable in its own way. It's coming for all of us. It's part of living life. So what is it that we are really fighting for? What are we really trying to preserve and protect? Because like
these short, our death coming at an hour unanticipated. I may not be able to speak from your father's standpoint. I don't know what it's like to be a white man, especially being prepared for that. But from our angle, he was prepping for things that the government has already been doing to my people. He was prepping for a government that was aimed at being prepared for it. So we understand that even while death is inevitable, there's still things that we can do to make sure that we make it to the next day when there is a tyrannical government that is actively going against us in every way possible. Now, your father saw extreme acts of maybe what's going on with the government says, forget it, we're going against everybody. But since its inception, it's been attacking people of color. So anything that we can do to be able to extend our lives to a full extent where we can have children, be able to teach our children our ways before we pass on, be able to have that full life that's guaranteed in that Constitution that the tan tigers hate so much. We just make sure that we do what he can to make sure we live a full life. While your father doesn't understand, he had liberties that we were never privy to. The government has always been attacking us, whether it's by biological or habits or whatever, straight up criminal acts of police terror. Now, we understand that death is inevitable and it will come to us all. I don't run from it. I actually run towards it because when it comes to my death, I don't know my life is complete. But while I'm on this path to it, I'm going to protect myself from all dangers in a different kind of way because we face things that most people don't think of. Most people that aren't of color don't think of. We have other aspects that we can protect ourselves from a day-to-day basis on life that you guys don't have to worry about. So yeah, health is a factor, and we're always going to have to deal with that fact. But in the meantime, if there's something we can shoot back at to make sure us or our kids make it to see another day, we will.
Absolutely. And thinking about the social determinants, right? We're already looking at, depending on the population, depending on Black, Indigenous, person of color, there is a shortened lifespan regardless. And thinking about modeling for children, right? Each of our populations has different levels of violence that occurs within our communities. And so if we can be gun owners who model what it is to be a gun owner for our children and what it means to not become a vector for violence, then that can be another way to keep our our communities alive and healthy. For example, so I have inflammatory breast cancer, and this time last year, the doctor said to me, "You have about 8 months to live," and I was like, "Well, fuck," right? And this is a cancer that is actually primarily found in Black women. The 5-year survival rate is something like 3%. It's criminal, the lack of research that's done with regard to diseases that impact people who under research with regard to like how can we cure this, how can we treat this, what is the cause of this. And I just recently found out that there is a 40% reduction of evidence of disease in my body after finding some very miraculous medications. And at no point did I say, well, now I've got to start like figuring out, what am I going to do about this death thing? And like, how do I save myself, and what should I do with my gun? That wasn't ever a factor. It's never been a factor. I think one thing that our communities often don't think about is advanced directives. That's one thing I do at work, is invite people to think about advanced directives, especially with COVID, right? And what I often hear from Black and brown people is, well, I got nothing to give. And so it's this belief that an advance directive is like a will. And they're like, I don't have wealth to pass down. It's no, how do you want to die? It's not when, it's not, what's it gonna, involve, who's gonna be there, but it's literally like, what do we do at that time of death? And I think a lot of Black and brown people are actually thinking about death all the time. And putting it down on paper or telling a doctor to do this thing is really hard, because we're thinking about it so much and it's shifting so much. Because if it's not COVID that's going to kill us, then maybe it's breast cancer, or maybe it's police, or maybe it's some other ridiculous event that happens. And so I don't know that death necessarily is the factor that informs these choices.
Yeah, and I did want to comment back on that. Thank you for bringing up the advanced directives and that kind of thing. After all of this happened, we did form a trust and that kind of thing, and we had my mom fill out all of her like powers of attorney and her advanced directives and plans for how she would want it to be handled, because we went through like the worst 24 hours in my life and my family's life, and basically every single time we turned around it was like, well, I don't know what Dad would have wanted. Like, I don't know what decision should we be making. Like, he never really talked about this particular thing. There were some things he did talk about and other things that he didn't talk about. How would he want to be buried? Would he want us to spend a lot of money? Would he not want us to spend a lot of money? Some of those questions of like, most people don't know, would their parents be okay with being cremated, or would they rather be buried? And all of those questions that come up that are really difficult to talk about, but you need to talk about them, because that's not a decision that you want to put on your family when they are having literally the worst day of their life.
And I think that in communities like mine, my mom literally will walk into a room being like, when I die, like as if we were just like restart, as if the conversation had like just been going on. And it's like, when I die, I'm gonna come back and haunt you kids for not doing the dishes. And it's like, Mom, you're you're a supernatural being, and that's the shit you're gonna haunt us for. Like, are there no social justice ghosts? Is this why? Because like all our moms are mad at us still? Like, is this
You know what? You know what my dad would say? He would tell my mom all the time, if you sell my guns, I'm gonna come back and haunt your ass.
That sounds
but
like
I also had a little bit of an epiphany in that conversation, which was, Charlie, your answer was so spectacular, and thank you for being so vulnerable in that way. But I did have a little bit of an epiphany that, as a queer person, I often see, straight people's reaction to the queer community. And one of the, I don't know if you could call it like a theory, or one of the interesting things is that I've noticed is I feel like a like homophobic reaction to gay men is basically the fear that a straight man has about someone treating him the same way that he treats women. When you were explaining that to me, I started to realize that white, heteronormative, cisgendered men in this country that are preppers and have that level of fear of, what if the government comes after me? What if this happens? In hearing your explanation, I realized that they are afraid of being treated how they know everybody else in this country has been treated for so long, because they can see it, but yet they refuse to do anything about it until it happens to them.
That's the quote of this podcast right there.
I mean,
That's it.
Look,
That's it.
under my tutelage, Janice of European descent has been working hard. But I will say that's one of my things too. Is I feel like they think that Black and brown people are all like ascribing to like, I don't know, like Black supremacy, like ideology. Like that's what they think. They think we want to cut off all their heads and kill them and take their money and enslave them and shit. And we're like, no, dude, we just want to like go to work. We kind of like capitalism too and shit. So can't we just do that? Imagine if we had all done that though. Do you know what I mean?
They came into power by use of violence. That's the only thing they know to be able to keep them in power. So they feel as if when others come into power, they'll use that same violence to be able to intimidate others, not realizing we just want to be able to live like everyone else.
Right?
They came in power through this, so anybody else that wants that power is going to do the same thing that they have. Same thing Nelson Mandela had to deal with when he was working with that the apartheid in South Africa. He had to be able to make sure it was understood that it's not about supremacy; it's about being able to live equally and free.
I think about like this whole cultural appropriation thing, right? Which is so silly, but to me, sometimes silly. But you know, colonizers came to India, for example, and they were like, this outfit you're wearing is really strange, and this like henna you're wearing is really strange, and don't do that. And like 200 years later, they're doing it, and they became the people that they hate. And it's like, you all just hate yourselves. Like I can't fix that for you. Like I still love myself. It's awesome being South Asian. Do you know how fantastic we are? And like I can't fix it if you don't like yourself. And you're the ones who invented the type of therapy you do, so I can't fix that either. Like I don't know how to tell you. Like,
or lack thereof, because
that's all. I mean,
mental health stigma.
Yeah. Like in theory, that is also how I feel. So we interviewed this third party candidate, Mark Charles, and I don't know if you're familiar with him. Do you know Mark Charles?
I met him.
Mark.
Yeah, because he was at the center, right? I wanted to go to that. So he's running for president, and he is he's half Navajo, half white, Dutch, and then his running mate is like this gorgeous Black woman. Like, well, it's like just for me in my mind, I'm like, oh my God, how would that be for the season finale of America? You know what I mean? Like, what if
2020 has been full of surprises? I would not be surprised.
So it's a kind of a wild thing, but you know what I mean? But it's like, I love that dude. And like, I know I'm always like, yeah, I'm still going to vote for fucking blah, or whatever, right? I'm still doing my Democratic thing for now, I guess, right? But I think that if we're going to do it, I think now's the time, like, and I think that we have maybe, and I might be wrong. I mean, I've been on this. We're not having elections kick since like 2016, y'all.
That's true.
So like I'm like, it's not happening. Donald Trump going crazy. Like I have my receipts. I've been on it since then, right? And so I don't know. It feels to me right now like this is our last chance to have like a peaceful transition of power. I don't know that we're even going to have it though, and I feel like that is a very real concern of mine. And then I think and then I don't want to get into conspiracy theories because I am a information provider and I like people to have factual information at all times. But I'm pretty sure that the police are the army and they're gonna get us.
Well,
I think that's Donald Trump's like army. I think there's some of them obviously that are like not in his army, but I feel like that's what he's doing, and that's what's happening. Am I crazy?
No.
Crazy.
No.
I think that we do have a situation. It's important to remember that even under Reagan, we had a shadow government, right? So there are parallel people running the country, and that's not a conspiracy. It's very much available knowledge. And so it has been true that this is something that we've been subject to in one way or another. And the use of private militia to stop individuals in the country from organizing has been real. It was as real as it was. It's as real as it was in Tulsa, right? And so I think that that is um, not at all something crazy to think about. When it comes to peaceful transitions, I think that we're going to continue to see parallel governments, take on the job of the actual government so that we don't necessarily know what's happening.
Great. All right. Guess we better go get guns or whatever.
Great, because I mean, in the comments section on the 9 News live feed of the announcement of the NRA lawsuit coming out of New York, and a lot of the comments that were popping up were partly joking, and then also like serious Second Amendment advocates being like, well, now you're just asking for a civil war and all of these things, because they equate the NRA with like the Second Amendment and the Constitution itself. And so there were people that are like, why would you do that? Now you're just gonna like stir up all of these quote unquote crazies, and they're gonna start, trying to start a civil war now and all these things. I was like,
the first Civil War never ended, if you ask me. I'm wild. I don't feel like the first Civil War ever ended. Like, it's still the war against slavery in my mind. I don't know. That's how I feel about it. I feel like, the prison industrial complex, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's always been about Black people. That's how I feel about it. And I also would like to say that I also feel really complicit in the erasure of Indigenous voices in these discussions.
One of my favorite protest signs that I've seen, it said, "We're not trying to start a race war, we're trying to end one." And I was like, oh.
Yeah. So to me, it's like it's still carrying on. And I just feel like until we like have the Rebeccaning, get it, of like what happened at the inception of this country, of the genocide, of the the people who were already here, living here, and then like chattel slavery. Like, I just feel like our country's like too messed up now. But then on the other side of that, not to get deep because we got to go, but like, aren't we like all like that all over the world? Like, aren't humans just like horrible and we're just murdery? And like, is that what?
It's in our nature. Yeah. We have to accept that fact that we're not all good. We all have the capability of being violent creatures. In a moment, it's not necessarily what we choose. It's really what we have to do. But yeah, we all have to have the capability of being everything we despise. And a lot of times when we look at somebody and we despise them, it's because of something in us that we don't necessarily like, but we see in us from time to time. When you see someone with a vehement hatred against somebody else, it's generally because they see that same thing in them and they're trying their best to run from it.
It's true.
Yeah.
The ultimate thing, I think, is that we all have to be accountable for everything. When something horrible happens, it is a collective shame. It is a collective failure. In owning that, that's when we can change and create something new, a new system.
To an extent, because I can't say collectively, I'm not going to take responsibility as a people for the transatlantic slave trade. That had nothing to do with me. We were the victims of it. There's some things people could take credit for as a people, as a human race. And there's some things you can say, okay, that's just a group of people. I'm not going to say it as a group of people like the United States government says towards a group of people racially. But when you look at a group of people that have an agenda of being cruel towards other people, you can lump that group of people up into a category and say, okay, it's time for you to go after them. It doesn't necessarily mean just because they all look alike. But I'm not going to be able to sit back and say I take responsibility of humankind because I have the capability of being like them doesn't mean I did it. There's some things I'm just not going to say that's just human. That's just fucked up what some white people did. It's fucked up what some black people did in Africa. It's fucked up what some Mexicans did in Mexico. But not all. I'm not going to be able to take responsibility for what we all did. I see the premise of what you're saying there as humankind moving forward, working together. But there's just some things I'm not going to say I'm capable of doing. I'm not going to say I take responsibility as a U.S. soldier during that time for what happened in Iraq when I chose not to pull the trigger at a time where it could have been my life. I do get what you're saying as far as moving forward collectively, but no, I'm not going to take ownership for some shit that I know I wouldn't do.
I'm sorry for phrasing it that way. And responsibility is not the word I hope to use. Accountability, I think, in the sense that I am always capable of changing the way that I show up in the world. And so, for example, as somebody who contributes massively to global warming in a way that then impacts individuals in other parts of the world who then engage in communal violence because they're forced to live more closely together than they would like to, or have to be, uh, you know, have to deal with a scarcity of resources because of my consumption, for example. That's one way in which I can show up differently. Or accountability in as much as I am a person who, as a US citizen, am paying for, I talk about minimum wage, right? At this $14 an hour, but whose hour? When somebody who is enslaved elsewhere, usually women and children, are doing the mining of resources that then make industries in this country possible and create those jobs that are minimum wage jobs. So when I advocate for something, the secondary repercussions and the tertiary repercussions, I think that's important for me as an individual to take accountability for when I have unintentionally caused those kinds of harms and created the conditions that I now recognize have been damaging globally.
I get where you're going now, and I agree wholeheartedly. I'm sorry for the miscommunication.
You guys
I
did
appreciate
so
you sharing
good.
everything.
I loved it. Yeah.
This is how people can have productive conversations. We don't have to fight just because we have different points of view. But Nami, from your background in public health, in our other conversation, we actually did bring up gun violence as a public health crisis. Because of the lobbying of the NRA, we can't actually study as a public health crisis. And so, like, how do you see the role of public health in gun violence, and is there a possibility of, or what would be the advantages of treating it as a public health issue instead of this, like, pointing fingers, who pulled the trigger, who's responsible?
The advantages are if we can make some relationship to social determinants of health. So, what are the conditions that cause violence of any kind? What are the conditions under which a person owns a gun? Do those conditions then change the person's life expectancy, their income level, their physical health, their environmental health, and so on? Without any data, then we don't know. It's just conjecture and narrative. We know that we hear some of those terrible stories. We also know that there are some devastating scenarios in which young people engage in gun violence, and we don't want to see that happen. But they do that probably because they are out of other options in the environment. So when you're drowning in a community, right? What are you going to do? You're going to cling to the person next to you, and they're going to start drowning with you. Really, the nature of why that violence happens in certain communities is something worth studying. But without the data, there's no answer. I think there one other implication would also be to understand who is buying guns of what type and who's using them how often, because this would then impact elections, especially when their electoral boundaries are drawn, because they do use software like RedMap, for example, to check out like who is buying what, and does that make this a Republican district or a mixed district, and like how do we then break these districts down? So that is another reason to do some research to determine, are we going to crack and break these
As we kind of are wrapping up here with like our closing thoughts, I'd like to hear from you if you have anything that you want to, like, do we miss anything? Do you have any thoughts that you wanted, like something you just wanted to put out into the world? You got a Cash App, you need money, like just now's the time.
Nami, please.
Thank you. Only that Asian Americans are often seen as this model minority. And so doing something like owning a gun is, gosh, we're not allowed to do that. And one way to buck that stereotype is just get a gun and use it right and get trained. But also, if you feel like this is an important thing for you as an Asian American person, and the model minority stereotype is holding you back, please don't let that happen. And find me and my friends who are Filipino and find Redneck Revolt, and we will support you in that.
My takeaway is for those Black people that are listening to this, not only buy a firearm to be able to defend yourself and your family, get training. I cannot say that enough. I see you at the range thinking you know what you're doing just because you hit a bullseye once and know what you're doing, that you're properly trained. You don't know the scenarios of when you can and when you can't pull it out. You don't know when to be able to fire at multiple targets. You don't know when you can be able to go to jail for something you think is morally right but legally wrong. If you're going to own a firearm, get training. Even if you're not going through me, I'll offer mine for the lowest rate you're going in the city. But if you feel not comfortable with me, find someone you feel safe with and get training on how to be able to deal with your firearm. It's just like you're not going to be able to be 15, buy a car, and feel like you can drive. You need training and be able to prove that you are competent enough to be able to use it. It's the same thing as a firearm. This thing can take someone's life. If you're not willing to be able to get that training, in my opinion, you don't deserve to own a firearm. I've seen people that can take someone's life by trying to be able to show out and be tough with it. So if you're going to be able to defend your life with firearms, get the necessary training.
I'll give it up for that, even though I'm like, no, don't get any guns, you guys. All right.
I tell you what, come to one of my classes and see if you still feel the same way after.
I can't go anywhere because there's a coronavirus. So I don't go out of the house. I feel like not just that, but like also I don't want to kill everybody. Like if I get it and then give it to people.
But what if you try shooting at it?
If I
The American way right there.
Like that.
Don't wear a mask, shoot it.
I wouldn't be surprised if some Americans felt like they could shoot the corona.
Oh Lord, it's bad. We got a lot of troubles here, but one thing I will leave you guys with is that we do have a really beautiful community. I think in Denver particularly, there is a lot of really positive, progressive work that's being done here. And I think it's really nice that at least we can like get together to talk before like, you know, the internet goes out and they kill us all or whatever's coming in November. Was that too sad?
I don't know. No, for sure.
Thank you once more to our amazing guests. That was such a great episode. I loved it. Off Color is a Tan Tigress production. It is produced and edited by Janice Motzko. Music is by James Meekum. Like us on Facebook, Off Color Podcast. Follow us on Twitter, Off Color Pod. And if you really like what you're hearing, go ahead and check out the Tan Tigress Patreon. Become a member for as little as $1 a month.